So this third lecture is a rather extensive lecture, and it's probably the one thing, if anything, you remember from your Principles of Economics 1 course. This involves supply, demand, and the determination of the equilibrium price and quantity, where the equilibrium represents the point where there's no tendency for change. So what we're using here is supply and demand to determine price and quantity for the market, right? And this really is kind of the hallmark of what we call, again, neoclassical economics. It distinguishes it from classical political economy like Smith and Marx, where things were seen to have a value that was inherent within the object. This is focusing a bit more on how there are buyers of a product, there are sellers of a product. They interact in a marketplace setting to find that price and quantity. Okay, so we're going to have a few assumptions here. And these assumptions are going to be important for understanding the whole supply and demand framework. What we're going to have here is perfect information about the products, right? So everyone knows everything, both in terms of who the sellers are, who the buyers are, the nature of the product being sold. There are also many buyers and sellers, so there isn't anything too competitive or anti-competitive in the marketplace. There are no barriers to entry or exit, so firms can willingly leave and enter the marketplace just as buyers can. And then finally, the product being sold is going to be considered homogeneous. In other words, it's going to be considered a good that doesn't differ from one seller to another. So it might be something like a commodity, let's say like gold or copper, right? You can't really tell who the gold or copper is coming from just by the nature of the product. Okay. So what we're going to do here is probably break this video lecture into two parts. In the first part, we'll do demand. In the second part, we'll do supply. Maybe even we'll have a third part where we're going to talk about the determination of the equilibrium. Okay, so demand. Demand is going to represent the willingness and ability of buyers to buy a particular good at a different price at a point in time. Again, it's the willingness and ability of the buyer to buy a particular good at a particular point in time. And two important words in that definition is the willingness and ability, right? So the willingness part is capturing their preferences for the good. The other part is capturing their income, their ability to buy the good, right? Like, in terms of my preferences, yeah, I would prefer a luxury car, right? Give me a BMW or a Mercedes, right? I have a willingness to buy those goods, but I lack an ability to buy those goods, right? My ability to buy might lie something in a lower end of a vehicle, right? So, right, I might be able to buy a used Corolla or Civic, right, rather than a new BMW or Mercedes, right? And I might have preferences for that Corolla or Civic versus like walking or riding my bicycle, right? There I would fulfill both my willingness and ability, right? For walking, I have an ability to walk, but not a willingness to walk. And for the luxury car, I might have a willingness to drive a luxury vehicle, but not an ability. So the willingness, reflecting the preferences, ability, reflecting my income to buy a particular good at a particular point in time. Now, this demand function is going to be a function of several different items, right? So we're going to understand the demand for, let's say, for phones, right? So demand for phones is going to be a function of the price of phones, the price of substitute goods, the price of complementary goods, and we're going to define all these things in turn. Income, preferences, number of buyers, and expected prices. Now there's a whole bunch of other things that it's going to be a function of, but if we kept it very simple, what we're going to have here is our demand. which is going to be reflected by the quantity of goods. It's going to be a function of the price of the good itself, a function of the price of other goods, substitute goods and complementary goods, income, preferences, number of buyers, and expected future prices. Okay, so let's deal with the first part, which would be the law of demand, right? Which you may remember, or may remember from your Principles of Economics 1 class. And it says that ceteris paribus. Now, what does that term mean? Ceteris paribus means all other things being equal or held constant. So we're going to think here is that there's going to be a whole bunch of things, variables, that are going to be held constant, but just one variable itself is going to change. Okay? So it's saying ceteris paribus, there's an inverse relationship between the price of the product and the quantity demanded. Quantity demanded, not the demand. The quantity demanded. Ceteris paribus, there is an inverse relationship between the quantity demanded of the good and the price of the product itself. Okay, so what that's saying here, if we go back to our original set of equations here, right, is that this variable is going to have an inverse relationship to the quantity demanded of the variable, given that all these other variables are held constant. Okay, so that would mean then that when the price of phones rises, the quantity demanded of phones falls, right? And vice versa, right? That we could also imagine the price of phones falling and the quantity demanded rising. Now this is a in the law of demand, we said that there was a inverse relationship between price and quantity. Now the question then would be, is this a causal relationship or is it just a correlative relationship? If you remember back to the previous lectures, right, we said that there are two types of relationships between variables. Correlative just means that they move in either the same direction or move in opposite directions, without saying that one is causing the other to happen. Causal relationships, as the term implies, means that if one event happens, then the other event happens. Now, in terms of the law of demand and the definition of the demand curve, what we're going to say here is that it's a causal relationship. Now, the question would be, why is it a causal relationship, right? Why is it that when the price changes, the quantity changes, right? Or vice versa. Why is it that when the quantity changes, the price would change? Either way can be a causal relationship. If one event happens, then the other event happens. Now, the reason why we might think that that might occur would have to do something along the lines of the diminishing marginal utility and the fact that there are diminishing reservation prices. Now, what does that mean? Well, what we're going to see here is that in the market for phones, we're going to have the quantity of phones and the price of phones in an XY space. And from the law of demand, we know that there's an inverse relationship holding all of these other things constant. What that's going to mean is that the graph is downward sloping. As the price falls, quantity demanded rises. Or, as quantity demanded falls, price rises. Again, why that happens? It is a causal relationship. It would have to do something with the fact that, for the first part, diminishing marginal utility. As I consume more and more of a